Hello, in this class of LTE, we are going to discuss about LTE KPI. KPI as a key performance indicator. Now, as key performance indicators are required to check out the performance of the network. So, we have LTI KPI. So, these KPIs values are required to check performance of network. That means in optimization process, we require to have check on the KPI values and accordingly we require that what is the performance of the network as the name depicts that this is key performance indicators. So indicators of performance parameters. So we have some KPI list according to the services, and as per the services we require to check the number of the total performance of the network. So we have categories of KPIs as we have number of KPIs starting from we have accessibility KPI, we have a list of retainability KPIs, then we have mobility KPI, accessibility, then we have retainability, mobility, we have service integrity KPI, we have availability KPI, service integrity availability KPI, we have utilization KPI, and then we have traffic KPIs. So we have total number of 7 categories of key performance indicators. Like first one is as accessibility KPI. So in accessibility KPI, we have the number of KPIs those who are required for in order to access the network. So to access the network, all of the services, all of the messages are organized under accessibility KPI list. Under retainability KPI, we will discuss various KPI, those who are responsible for retainability of the services. That means how much I am capable, network capable to have retainability of a particular service. Then we have mobility, which deals with whenever user moving from one location to another location. So we have a category which is mobility KPI. Then we have total service integrity KPI. Service integrity KPI has a list of KPIs, those who are responsible for various services. Then we have availability KPI, resources available to the user. What are the parameters for that? How much resources we are utilizing, those are under utilization KPI. And then as per the traffic, total number of users, so we have under traffic KPI. So these are the major 7 categories of the key performance indicator. Now we have more number of KPIs under each and every category that we will discuss in our classes. So today let's start with the very first KPI, which is accessibility KPI. So our topic today which we are going to discuss now is accessibility KPI. So this is a category of accessibility KPI. Now why we require accessibility KPIs in the system? So accessibility KPIs are used to measure probably whether services requested by the users, that means it can be required to measure that whether services requested by user, whatever the services I have requested can be accessed in given time or not. So can be accessed in given conditions. So the term here as accessed. So if I have requested for, if this is a user equipment and it has requested for a service, so we require to check that whether the service is accessed in a radio conditions or a given conditions or not. Now who will provide us the conditions? The conditions will be provided by EUT-RAN part, which is Evolved Universal Terrestrial Radio Access Network, in which we, or Evolved Packet service. Now we have these two parts and service will be forwarded. That means service will be granted to the user equipment by these parts, EUT-RAN or the core network. So we require to check out that whether the services, those services which are requested by the user can be accessed or not. So all of the factors under this will be under the category of accessibility KPI, in which we require to measure the services access. Now we have two messages under this criteria as first one as RRC, and this RRC stands for Radio Resource Control. This radio resource control is between the user equipment and EUT-RAN part. That means the E node B. So here in this part we have RRC and next is ERAB, which is Evolved Radio Access Bearer. Now bearer are the services. So evolved radio access services, as my major concern is, that means services should be accessed within a given time. So I have these various services and radio resource control is working on this part. So very first service is, that means very first list of KPI under accessibility KPI is RRC setup success rate for service. So first one is RRC setup success rate for service. Now whenever user equipment wants to communicate to the E node B, so there is a setup of radio resource control. For each and every service or for signaling, there is a setup of radio resource control. Now, whenever radio resource control is fully established between the two ends, then only UE can access the service, otherwise not. So that means it becomes an important point in accessibility KPI that there should be RRC, which is radio resource control setup success rate, and for service. Now we have some messages. So I can say that this services, so this is a case of establishment cause. So we will have establishment case. Now we have entities like we require to communicate between user equipment and E node B is an evolved node B. So first of all, there is a message from user equipment to the E node B and a message is RRC connection request. That means user is demanding, the user is sending a request message which is please connect RRC with me, I want to access the service. So there is, that means at the E node B end there is a setup of RRC connection for this particular user equipment, and after setting up there is a response message back which is RRC connection response. That means we have sending a request and now we require a response back message. So in this case My setup is successful and I am connected to the eNode B and RRC has connected me. So I can say this is a good case. So KPI, that means we have number of user equipments requesting for our service. So we have a formula defined that RRC setup, RRC setup success rate, and this is for service. Now this is equals to RRC connection success now this divided by RRC connection attempt multiplied by 100%. So if I have total number of attempt as 100 and out of which 90 is the total connection which is success. So I can say that my RRC service success rate is 90%. That means out of the 100, 10 calls or 10 requests are not being processed, other rest all are being processed. So this is my success rate is 90%. So this is the very first category of KPI, which is RRC connection success rate for service. Now we have second, which is also related to RRC, but here in this service, this is a case of signaling. So which is same as success rate for signaling. The total number of success on the total number of attempt multiplied by 100%. Now, the KPI is always measured in percentage because we require a calculation factor, that means in percentage form, the total number of requests and accordingly the total failures or the total attempts. That's why we generally measure these KPIs in percentage form. So let's move to the next category of KPI, and that is related to ERAP setup success rate. So third one is ERAB, which is Evolved Radio Access Bearer Services. So we have ERAB setup success rate. And this ERAB setup success rate is for voice over IP services. So eNode B receives ERAB, that means when eNode B receives ERAB setup request message, ERAB is a part of basically EPS, Evolved Packet Service. So ERAB is a part. Now radio access bearer are the various services. So whenever we have a voice services or a data service, so we require a setup of ERAB. So whenever it receives a ERAB request, so it has to make a connection so that data will flow. Total connection so that data flows of the service. Like I have used the VoIP service, so we require a ERAB request message, response message, a particular connection so that there is a data flow between two entities. Now ERAB identity, that means what type of service that you are using is identified by MME as mobility management equipment. Now MME is basically the entity who initiated ERAB setup. Because all the radio access services are there with whatever the type of services which we are using is identified by mobility management equipment, and then only eNode B can communicate with the user equipment. Like we have entities user equipment, now eNode B, now I will draw here MME as a mobility management equipment. Now the first message, that means ERAP setup request as initiated by MME, that we are discussing. So we have ERAP setup request. So this ERAP setup request is forwarded to eNode B. Now eNode B has to reconfigure here RRC. So here we have RRC reconfiguration. That means to check the resources again. Now when RRC reconfiguration is completed, that means RRC reconfiguration complete, then we have ERAP setup response. Now ERAP, that means MME is connected to the serving gateway which has to route the packets. So various services setup is initiated by ERAP. Now this is the case, then MME is taking a step to initiate a request. That means there is a data at the data center and it wants to deliver to the user equipment. That means downloading case. Now we have a case of UE triggered ERAP setup also. That means UE also wants to uplink some data. So in that case, UE will start ERAP setup for MME. So now let's start with next case. So we have a case of UE triggered ERAP setup success. Okay, now how UE triggers? So again we require entities like user equipment. Then we require eNode B as a second entity and we require MME. So these three entities. So first of all, it has to configure RRC. So it is sending a request RRC connection request. Now there is a setup. Now we have RRC connection response. Request and response. That means our setup is completed. Initial message, that means it wants to have ERAP. So that means the initial message. Now this initial message eNode B will forward to MME as this one as the initial UE user equipment message for to attach to the particular equipment. Now first of all, now again it has to send up a setup request. So you can please set up a request as it has to identify. So there is a message security mode, which is security mode command message. As security is applied only when UE is triggering for something. So we have a security mode command message. With this we have RRC connection reconfiguration. Whenever we have message, so we have RRC connection reconfiguration. So with the reconfiguration, if we have reconfiguration complete, like we have completed the reconfiguration part, so we have ERAP setup. So only the different thing that first of all it is initiating for a message that we had discussed in the RRC connection message. Then there is a security mode command message. Whenever UE wants to access the network, so I require to identify, I require to make user secure. So that's why here is a part. Now how to calculate KPI for this? Now KPI for this is VoIP. As we are using VoIP service, so we have VoIP evolved radio access wearer setup success. Upon we have VoIP ERAP setup attempt. And this multiplied by 100%. Again, we require to measure in the percentage form. So that's why we have set up in percentage form. Now, we have major concern upon a service which is VoIP service. Now we have another service as ERAP setup success rate for all services. So ERAP setup, this being the fourth category, ERAP setup success rate for all type of services. In also we have to measure a total number of requests and the attempt message and then in a percentage form. Now next we have call setup success rate as call now there is a call setup success only when our RRC connection and ERAP setup is completely complete. So that means call setup success rate is combination of both. So we have call setup success rate which equals to RRC connection success upon RRC connection attempt this multiplied by RRC connection success and the attempt, this multiplied by ERAP setup success divided by ERAP setup attempt and multiplied by 100%. So as call setup success rate depend upon the RRC connection and the ERAP setup, that's why we have a combination of both. So whenever we require to measure our call setup success rate, we have to check out RRC and ERAP set, and again it is in a percentage form. That means out of 100, if you are having 80, that is very bad, that 20 calls are not connected properly. So this is accessibility KPI that we have discussed. So in this class of LTE KPI, we have discussed about total number of KPIs and then we have focused on accessibility KPI. We will continue with the next KPI in our next class. Thank you so much.